And with that, it is our first Wednesday episode of Not Playing Politics. I'm Alexander Keaton. And as always, my Rio, Nick Bradshaw, is here. Say hi, Nick.
How you doing, buddy?
So far, so good. But we are pleased to announce that we have a guest today, Miss Dawn Ridgewood, a counselor, a mother, and an all around great person. Dawn, say hi to everybody.
Hello, it's nice to be here.
Wonderful. So, Nick, why don't you kick this shindig off tonight? It's our first Wednesday. I don't know what you call this escapade, shenanigans.
I feel like we're putting on one of those Disney shows on ice. No, Dawn, welcome. We're so glad to have you. Full disclosure, Dawn is a friend of the show and someone that we respect. We wanted to bring you in because, this show a lot of times ends up being, two political hacks here on the internet chatting about what we think and our perspectives. And I thought, what does bringing in one of our, teammates, colleagues, friends, peers perspective, who's, not only a wife and a parent, but a professional and a woman working in the industry, to see different perspectives that we're seeing. So I think it's important that we share that. Also, Don, I've experienced some wonderful chats with you over the years with regard to, your awareness of politics. So let me kick it off right off the bat and say, for a lot of people, this was going to be the culmination of either the most tyrannical upheaval of a vote and a cheating of the American public by the political class to install a government, and to another side of the country, this is a return to balance and peace and taking the keys away from this evil person. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? And where do you think you're falling on this?
Well, it's for me personally, it's just been, I think from an observational standpoint, it's just been really interesting watching people. I don't think it's either. I think my perspective is that politics is always the answer to a pendulum swing. And so Trump was the answer to Obama, and Biden's the answer to Trump. It's the anxiety that we live with pulling us to extremes. And in this case, I think we're even more divided. I think Obama set us up for it, but we're even more divided because really it was almost a 50-50 vote. So people have tons of anxiety, and they're just expressing it through massive amounts of fear about wherever we've landed. And the other side would be expressing that if Trump had won.
So with your backing here, your educational background, of course, and your professional training with regard to counseling, do you, if I may, ask with regard to the highest, privacy standards in place, this show is very HIPAA compliant. When you go to that part in your mind, when that training inherently kicks in you, are there thoughts, are there ideas that you have about, communicating with family and friends, challenges we have to overcome, building those bridges? How do we get off of the political precipice here?
That's a really good question. And of course, I mean, that's hard to navigate even in my own life, because I have a huge extended family, and we all have very different opinions. I have siblings on either coast who are extremely liberal. I have siblings in the center. I have gay siblings. I have siblings in relationships with trans individuals. So there's this huge, on one level for me, this desire to love people well, right? And so, of course, that would be the thing that I would always lead with, regardless of my political stance or their political stance. How do we love people well? And then there's also just hoping that people can see truth and reality without living, because when we set our anxiety down, we're able to see reality a lot more clearly. And you can't force somebody to do that. So it is a hard thing to navigate. I think that they can be separated. I believe that it is possible to love somebody well, regardless of their political stance. And that just takes maturity. And we don't want to be mature as a society. We want our way. And that's what my 9-month-old does. He wants his way. Like we haven't grown out of infancy in a lot of ways.
So that's a great point. And let me push, not push back on it, but let me sort of expand the conversation here. As a society, is that maybe sort of the bigger problem? Is at some point, not just as maybe certain groups, but as an entire society, we have sort of rejected the idea of actually multiple ideas: wisdom, maturity, and then objective reality. Those all seem to be ideas that are completely foreign to the broader conversation that people are having. And so that's what I think I think that's really what's led to a lot of this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And it's hard to see where the roots come from it. So on one level, we're an immature society because we're a young society. So we're kind of like the teenagers acting out, demanding that our parents see our perspective because we believe that our perspective is right. But then on another level, we claim that we are the most advanced nation. And of course, financially, on some levels, we are. And it, yeah, I would say that as a whole, regardless of right or left, we have a pandemic of immaturity and demanding our way. And how are you ever productive when you're just demanding your own way? Like, what relationships, whether it be a marriage relationship or a relationship with kids or globally or the church or anything, what succeeds when we're just demanding that we be heard, but we don't have to listen?
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Let me think about that one. When has that worked out well in my life? Nick, when was the last time it worked out well in your life?
Well, I just want to say what I find fascinating about the conversation is having another parent on the show. It's funny to see that dynamic that's present, as I am definitely the bachelor of the group. And it's funny because, you guys can look at these things. A quick note here for our listeners out there. And John, we're glad you're here for this. A quick story I'm going to share about Alex. He knows where this is going to go. And it puts into perspective for those of us that don't have children, how to understand behavior on a level that just there's no comprehension. And it goes something like this. I was on the phone with Alex years ago, and we were having a conversation. And of course, we were in our 20s, and his first son was not very old at all, maybe 2. And of course, we were in our early 20s, so we were clearly solving all the problems of the world. Every problem we ever had, we were just knocking out worldly problems like you do in your early 20s. And the middle of the conversation, he goes, hold on a second, hold on. And he says that to his son. He goes, sweetheart, hey, son, I need you to stop putting spaghetti in the television. And he said it in such a way like it was normal to say something like that, or if not normal, not shocking, right? And so at first I'm like, oh my gosh, is the kid safe? Is he damaging the television? Is the house? And then I was like, now I'm kind of just intrigued behind the physics of it. Like, how does one get spaghetti necessarily into television? And so that I bring that up to say, I think as parents, you're equipped to understand things from an irrational perspective. And one thing that Alex has perpetually brought to this show, and why we wanted it to not be about playing politics, is from the concept of saying, how can we bring a little rational thought to this? Now, I want to inject something here that I saw earlier in the week, and I didn't understand it. And I want to make sure that I make this abundantly clear. I'm not flippantly trying to say this to crush the Dems or smash the libs or beat the cons I'm legitimately saying this because though I don't think I'm the dumbest person, I certainly don't think I'm the smartest person, but I think I do fall somewhere in between to understand basic communication skills. But when I see things like comments, when people say things like, they make correlations between things that I can't understand. So they'll say things like, when Nancy Pelosi will make comments about things like, you've chosen your whiteness, or whiteness is a sickness, or this concept that identity drives ideology, identity drives rationality, identity drives common sense perspectives. Again, this is not me just Hulk smashing the Dems. There are enough people out there on channels doing that. I'm legitimately asking people in the same way that you ask a child about putting spaghetti in television and trying to rationalize a question. I don't know what that means. I don't feel like I can understand the argument that's being made. Recently, there's a gentleman, and I'm going to end on this point, a gentleman named Michael, I think it's Michael Bennett Dyson, who's a professor at, I believe it's Georgetown. And in my opinion, he's an identitarian. And his comment was, American exceptionalism is white supremacy. That may be a wonderful topic in like a liberal arts study program at Georgetown. I'm asking the two of you who can rationalize irrationality better than I can. Do you know what that means? Because I fundamentally don't understand the point that they're making. And I'm not playing dumb here. What I'm trying to say is,
Oh, we never think you're playing dumb, Nick.
no, I'm a natural at this. It's an inappropriate usage of word. It's an inappropriate argument to frame something. And I don't understand how, is it designed so that it can't really be debated logically because it's not logical and it's just something that is designed to elicit an irrational response based? Is it designed to take something that's logical and translate it into something that's emotional? I guess that's my question I came to.
Well, I'll let our guest take first crack at it.
Okay, so
which is translation. That's me throwing you under the bus.
Oh, that's totally fine.
Welcome aboard.
My first thought would be that it's almost like a straw man argument, right? Like, because you can tear it down pretty quickly if you actually look at the logic behind it. But then also, the second that you start saying, well, my whiteness didn't make me a racist by default, or it didn't make me believe X, Y, or Z by default, you all of a sudden are the one in the corner having to back yourself out of it and justify who you are as a person. So you immediately go on the defense. So it's a comment that you can't argue against without looking like the jerk.
So it's not designed to be discussed or solved. It's designed to be sustained and irrational.
I feel like it is because, like, okay, for example, you've chosen your whiteness comment that I think you said attributed to Pelosi. I mean, that's literally just not true, right? Like, none of us who are white chose to be white. I had no say in that whatsoever. And if we look at it from a genealogical perspective, the wheels have been in motion for me to end up a white female centuries ago. So there, on one level, you're like, you would go down that rabbit hole, right? Like, you would want to start arguing that, but that's not actually their point. Their point is that you're living, you are a step below in your ethics due to your whiteness, which, so they get you arguing in circles, and they get you arguing to defend your honor and to defend your right to be a white person, which you can't control, instead of actually addressing real issues. Because the second you start talking about, because the reality is that there have been periods of time in America where white people have ruled over other colors. And of course, this is a global issue. Slavery is a global issue. Looking down on other races is a global issue. But you start getting so personally defensive about it that you've lost the argument already. So yeah, I don't think it's something that can be truly argued. I mean, we could start talking about the truth behind systemic racism versus the sort of overinflatedness of it. But I don't know. I don't think it's something that can be rationally argued because it's not a rational statement.
Well, I mean, it gets even more irrational when you have people coming out talking about how minorities who fall having a, let me rephrase this. When you have minorities who have a different political opinion from anyone who votes Democrat, they have become multiracial white people. Like that was, I forget who it was. I think it was even the same gentleman that Nick was referring to. But that's one of the things he talked about was this sort of it may be someone else. I wasn't expecting to talk about this tonight, so I didn't plan to have the gentleman's name in front of me. But we've all seen it. For those of us who have black friends who are conservatives on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you get to the names that they're called. And the argument's always, you've internalized whiteness. You're trying to be white. I mean, growing up before all of this was necessarily a thing, I'm over at the comic book geek table, right? With, it's no one cared about, we had all the races over there. We were all comic book geeks because it wasn't cool to be into comics at the time. And of course, we heard all all my black friends heard the same thing. You're trying to be white. It goes on and on from there. But it's like now you can be a multiracial white person, and this is a devastatingly toxic idea. I mean, it's not even reverse racism; it's just pure racism. What do you think is driving this? Is it literally trying to create a scapegoat, or is there something that you think is actually? Do you think? Let me phrase this. Do you think the people who espouse these ideologies actually have do they have good intentions, or is this part of a deeper issue? Do you think?
Well, I think one of my reasons in wanting to bring this up, and I want us to pivot to what we're actually talking about tonight with regard to the inauguration and the direction we're going, is that I feel like these are some of this is some of the fuel being put in the tank of the federal government as far as what we're going to start to see in the national media and in the social side. Shapiro was speaking a while back, Ben Shapiro show, and he was talking about, the government can balance itself, policy can balance itself, the economy can right itself, it can naturally correct. But the social programs are where you can do a lot of damage to things because you can start splitting them apart. I mean, every element of our life over the last 4 years, in my opinion, has become politicized to some level. Education, certainly. Sports. Do we stand or not stand? Do we play the national anthem or do we not? And I'm curious to see if any of these things are going to miraculously go away. I'm wondering what the shift will take place there. The other reason I wanted to bring it up is because I think what we have now is I'm sorry to say this, and I don't say it with any joy in my heart. I don't view Joe Biden as a leader remotely, and I don't think that it will be his administration. I think that he will be a figurehead in this administration, and I think that he will have a lot of the analogy of the fuel in the tank behind this will be a lot of socially progressive agendas coming down the pipe. But the concern that I have is where, for many people, this unwanted onslaught of policing language, policing people, using words that we can't fundamentally understand, that we can't engage with, or that we're required to engage with so much that it's just that the level of political fatigue and social exhaustion is just oh my goodness, it's something that's really exhausting that way. Quick side note, I saw a perspective of someone presenting the argument that, what you do the final step in a transition from a psychological operations perspective is normalization, right? Mm-hmm. It's making things the norm. And you do that through channels of in our society, mass communication. And I think that that's the part that I think if I feel a little apprehensive about, that's what it is. It's that shift and it hasn't even been subtle. And for the government to now have the fuel in the tank of thinking that they have control of the government, which I don't believe that any one party really does. There's majorities, but they're very, very small in both houses, and the potential for them to flip is very present. I just don't know how we're designed to look now at our government that is going to take on the role, in my opinion, of social arbiter rather than adhering to the guidelines set forth by the Constitution. And I just don't know if any of us possess the time, the energy, the lexicon, or the capacity to want to engage in this kind of environment. And that's why I see this new incoming administration as dangerous. There's not leadership from the top. There's an underswelling of fuel in the tank that's being pushed. And that's the concern. And they're going to be unaccounted for members that you'll never see or know or be able to hold accountable through elections.
And of course, I mean, to bring balance to that, of course, the left would argue that was the same with Trump, is that there was this weird fueling from behind, and he brought his own family in to make policy without actually being elected officials. I think on one level, he might have normalized that for us, unfortunately, to where it does open the door for that to be possible.
I think we've had presence for a long time. I mean, Kennedy made his own brother attorney general. We've had people there for long. And this isn't me pushing back on you, Don, directly. I'm saying it's a perspective that, yes, there's always going to be one side, like we talked about at the beginning. One side is always going to say that the house is on fire. I assure you, my father and sister right now are, if there's the safest distance they can socially distance right now, they're doing it, believe me, because for 4 years, one thought the world was on fire and the other one was blissfully enjoy, and now the tables have swapped. But that, I think, is the inherent danger that we see. And turning towards what we were going to talk about tonight with our show, this inauguration for many people highlighted the ruling political class coming in, stealing an election and put it, from one perspective, and undermining the safety security of their vote. I mean, there's a person who's being looked at under investigation, standing on the dais where their father has their hand raised to take the oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, while their own business practices are in question with regard to foreign entities and how they negatively affect the United States. That alone is a cause for something far beyond irony, I think. Where are you guys on this?
Well, for me, if I want to pivot to Krista, I'm sorry to. What is your name again? I just forgot. Dawn.
Oh, Dawn.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. I have material out in front of me, and I'm looking at the wrong people now. So yeah, no. While I can, let's just pretend that 30 seconds didn't exist. My issue is this, right? So this kind of starts back to where we were at the beginning when we were talking about the fact that they're just, as a society, we've lost all sense of maturity, of rationality, of objective reality, right? Isn't this sort of the problem? It's like the fact that we can have such radically different opinions of what is going on. Isn't that the bigger problem? There's no one who can sit there and say, okay, well, hold on, let's look at this rationally. Or because again, my friends on the left would say, again, they would have said the same things. Like, why don't you see how terrible Trump is and how he's destroying the world and everything is awful and is on fire and the unicorns are dying, and it just seems like there is this fundamental disconnect from anything. Like, how are we supposed to have a society where we can't even agree on on the shape of reality? I mean, it just seems like we've completely thrown it off, and this is exactly this kind of example is what we're talking about. Nick, you're over here looking at the fact that yes, Hunter Biden is under investigation. I mean, legitimate investigation for some real problems that, of course, no one talked about until after it looked like his dad was going to get into office. Now it's okay to talk about, but beforehand, you're crazy to even think that there was a problem or suggest that there should be an investigation. So the entire shape of our realities are different. Is there a way to bridge that gap, and how do we do that? Particularly if there's no objective reality that anyone's willing to agree to.
Well, I think it's good, and I don't want to jump in on Dawn's point here.
But you will.
But I gladly will. No, I mean, Dawn, slapping the puck over to you in this. I mean, it's awfully hard to present the case that all these Americans are crazy for wanting to have validity within their own election, when for years they were told that their president, who was impeached for an improper phone call with Ukraine, was fully justified. But examining someone who actually has ties on the record to both China and Ukraine as completely superfluous until the election. And now we've already seen the posture of the media just softball away. The U.S. women's Olympic softball team isn't this good. It does kind of create a little bit of a reinforcement, I think, for those Americans out there that are saying, wait a minute, time out. I just want there to be credible elections and election integrity, and I want this to be done appropriately. And yet for those who called for election integrity, now they're being asked to resign. I mean, there is, I understand the 50-50 window, and I know you're always open to that as well. But I think going back to that rational comment, how do we make rational sense of this?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, especially because the media has been so very good at making sure that the people who are calling for checking up on the elections and verifying things were done correctly they're just repeatedly saying that these people are being irrational. So 75% of all, that's just a number I made up, of all things that we see and hear are saying, well, these guys are crazy and they just need to shut up and sit down and accept their defeat. If we're going to throw Trump under the bus a little bit, it certainly didn't help that he didn't show up today to the inauguration. Like, if we want to bring credibility to his willingness to do it correctly and go through the right channels and investigate properly, he really should have shown his face and shown a little decorum today. And he didn't. And so I feel like that on one level even made it worse, made the case worse, because now he just looks like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum, which of course he's very good at doing. But it's really hard. Like how, like when we talk about parenting or even as a counselor, you lead the way to rationality through being rational yourself and through being a stable force and through being the least anxious person in the room. That's a phrase that's used a lot in the counseling theory I use is, okay, so we're all in this room with anxiety, right? And my job as a counselor is to be the least anxious person in the room. But at this point, everyone's running around screaming and hitting drums. So it really doesn't matter that I'm sitting there rationally. No one cares. And like, how do you get out of that? Like, I don't know. It's a pickle. Like it's a difficult thing to navigate.
Said like a loving mother. That was wonderful. I could just see you there. You are on the dais, and everyone's flying. The jets are flying over, and the flags are out in the. Okay, you know what, Mr. President? Look, we are in the middle of a pickle. I need you to get out there. That's called pickle diplomacy. No, I mean, I think I want to kick it out to some of our fans listening tonight, and we are so grateful that they're there. John, one of our aspects of our show is that we credit all of the engagement and good thoughts of the show to our wonderful guests and to our supportive fans out there that are great. So a lot of people that we're seeing out there, thank you for tuning back in. We do see you. We appreciate you all for being here. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I want to go to a comment here that I've seen because it's something that's come up before and it's been really interesting. For many of us, we grew up, I'm hard to admit this out loud, but I'm going to say it. I'm in my 40s. Let's never talk about that. Let's never talk about, hey, Grandpa, someone just came through that hill the other day, so let's watch it. But what I'm getting at is we grew up in what was titled, all of us are of the same generation. We grew up in a kind of a post-racial generation, right? And we grew up in a time where race was something that was present, but it was kind of acknowledged as, oh, okay, cool. And then that was about it. It was that was it. You had friends that were black or Puerto Rican or Jewish or French or atheist or gay or tall or short, whatever. As long as they didn't like the Cincinnati Bengals or the Cleveland Browns, because as a Steelers fan, that's just inappropriate. But I want to go to Mr. D. Knuckles' comment here because it's something that's been brought up that we've talked about before. One thing that was very impressed upon us in the teachings of the wise and sageful Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was the concept that his children in his I Have a Dream speech would be about that of the judgment being based upon the content of his children's character and not the color of their skin. And I feel as though we have literally inverted that. Not only from an application of, I think at the time, as an African-American man saying how his children would be looked upon, it's now almost like the lens has been shifted to white people as how we should be looked upon. But the deeper part of that quote to me is when it says that, it's the content of the character. Well, to know the content of one's character, you have to get to know them. What makes up their character, their beliefs, their ideals, their philosophies, their intentions, their actions? What are those things? I have to be honest. For those of you who know me, being white is like the most boring part of my life. Like I don't say that with a dismissive or privileged tone. I'm simply saying I'm not really proud. I won't use the word pride, but I'm proud of my family for coming from an immigrant family on both sides. I'm proud of what my family's accomplished. I'm proud of the religious aspects that we hold. I'm proud of the jobs that they've worked and how my grandparents sacrificed and did things to help our family. Those are the things that I'm proud of, my beliefs in my faith and my friends and in my profession and the lovely people that I have to engage with in my life. Those are the things I'm drawn by. My love of music or cars or travel or whatever. Sitting around talking about my skin color is just something that is so underwhelming for me. Now, that's not the debate that I think we're having in the country, because it's not about people having skin color. It's the debate about how to translate shifting from the content of a character to skin color as a measurable objective to use to whip for power. And that's what, and I mean, whip as like whip votes, to collect and coordinate for power. And that's why when I see a comment, and I'm going to go to Mr. D. Nichols' comment here, he says, so has MLK, it's a fantastic question, has MLK's I Have a Dream speech become a white mantra? Judge us not by the color of our skin, but by the depth of our character. And I think that it's come now that what we've done is we haven't tried to ease the concept of how discriminatory racism is, and it is a spiteful and vengeful and jealous and stupid thing. Racism in its entirety. It's ignorance. It's ignorance in action, right? But it's also something that can be used so easily. So what we do now is we simply, earlier in our conversation, we were talking about the concept of how do we basically find a way to justify ourselves out of being born a certain way. Well, that is nothing. I have no control over that, but my content and my character, I do. And if there's anything that I'm seeing, it's that we're reducing people. This is not empowering. This is a reduction. We're reducing people's integrity, their feeling of the safetiness of the vote, their feelings of individual liberty. I want to give a quick shout out to a dear friend, to our friend Carrie in the beautiful state of California, who is out there wanting to fight the good fight. And we send peace and positivity to her crew. But I bring it up to say that there are a great many friends that have raised concerns to me about things like election integrity and the concept of living in a free country, supporting and enforcing the first, the second, all of the amendments. And I feel like by undermining the concept of the content of our character, we've reduced it to skin tone, which none of us has any control over. And it goes back to our original point of how irrational all of this has become. And now there are many who see the inauguration as the signed, sealed, and delivered approval of this tyranny of thought and this closed-mindedness. And I think they feel fear, and I think it's justified.
Okay, so let me see if I can make these things connect in a larger way, because it does seem like we're on multiple entirely different topics, but I think there is a connection here, whether it's the question about the validity of the election to critical race theory to the inauguration. It just seems like what we have is an entire society that wants to have two. This is the byproduct of having a society that has rejected reality, and what we're having is multiple different conversations. One side says you're evil because you're white. The other side says no, I'm not. The one side says, hey, I'm seeing some questions in this election. Can we at least have these questions looked at so we can actually know that this was legitimate? And the answer is no, you can't. And you're asking, and how dare you ask the question? Either on and on it goes. There is a lack of conversation happening. There's 100 different ways to parse this, but it really comes down to there is no conversation occurring. And the problem with that is when there's no conversation, when one side just says to the other, sit down and shut up. And I think you could argue that that's happened on both sides to a degree. What we're left with is there's no room left for rational debate. There is no, let us see the humanity in this other person that I'm talking to, so we can work to an answer that is equitable and as equitable as we can be on all sides, and have a productive conversation. It just seems like it is leading to a world in which a furthering of conflict, because I can't even say at the beginning of conflict, because we've been in conflict for years now. I mean, it's been going on for a long time. It just seems like there is no place left but a furtherance of physical violence. And I think the question I have is there a way to stop it, or is this too far gone?
So a lot of this comes back to like personal responsibility and like self-maturity, right? Like from an individual level, to go back to Nick's point before, we were talking about looking upon people not by their skin color, but by their the content of their character, and that to know the content of someone's character, they have to be known. The problem is, as a society, so if we collectively decide to stay immature, that means that we don't even know our own character. So we have a society full of people operating without an intrinsic value system. They have never defined their terms, right? They don't know what they're operating on. They're just operating on feeling. And so if they don't have their operating principles, then they're going to be blown by the wind of whoever seems the most rational, whoever calms them down the most, whoever is able to be, at least from the outside, looks like the calmest, safest person in the room. And there's always two responses to that, right? Like there's always two responses to, usually, like so I have 5 kids. So amongst my kids, I have one kid who's going to stoically respond to no matter what I tell her.
Right.
And then I have another kid who's going to throw a fit and have a big temper tantrum, and we're going to gut it out and we're going to get through it and we're going to figure it out. I would actually prefer that on some levels, because at least that's an honest response. And we can go from there. We can talk it out. But there's this weird, so the sit down and shut up thing is actually preventing self-examination and self-maturity on both sides, because as a parent, I'm not perfect. So if I tell my kid to sit down and shut up, then I don't have the opportunity to grow from that experience, and neither does she. And not that I'm at all advocating for violence. And I think that's where we've crossed the line, is like, violence is never going to resolve anything, regardless of which side it's on. And neither is sitting down and shutting up. Like, but we need to find that balance. We need to figure out, okay, who am I going to be in this moment? How am I going to operate? How am I going to have this hard conversation? How am I going to live out these values in politics or whatever? But nobody's doing that. They just want to look good, because that's a whole lot less vulnerable. Looking like, I mean, if you watched the inauguration today, they all looked perfect. They were beautiful. And that's a whole lot easier than getting down to the guts of what's going on in politics as a whole, and getting, down into what is going wrong in the Democratic Party and what's going wrong in the Republican Party. It takes maturity to look at the deep gut part, and people don't want to do that. They just want to look nice and live happy lives. And so we're making people polish themselves. Like, don't say racist things. Don't say, which is actually a good thing, but don't say anything that crosses a line, or we're just going to cancel you. You have to sit down and shut up now, because we're not going to examine the history that brought you to the moment of saying what you're saying right now.
Well, and it goes even further than that. It's not that we're saying don't say racist things, which I think everyone agrees with. It's racism is redefined as anything that disagrees with a particular ideology.
Yeah.
It is this ever-moving thing where, again, a conversation I've had with a friend of mine is like, you're sitting here saying we need to listen to Black voices and believe, Black stories, but you don't want to listen to Black voices that disagree with you politically.
Yeah.
You don't want to believe the stories of the people who are like, hey, no, this hasn't been a problem. It's like, if they disagree with you politically, they've internalized whiteness. they are safe Black people. Like it is legitimately racist language. And so I think, okay. I heard another gentleman on another channel talk about nice being sort of the epitome of morality in the country, like both in churches and in our nation. I think we've had this. I agree with him. I think we've had this obsession with being nice.
Yeah.
And so the problem is, while a lot of us were like, okay, well, let's be nice to one another, there's another group out there that's actually just using this as a means to power. It's for them that, the niceties was just an illusion, so they could obtain power and control us through. Again, you move the language, you move the goals. I mean, this is all stuff out of a number of totalitarian playbooks, but it is that we've made nice being the same thing as moral, and I don't think that those two are the same thing. I think being moral requires you not to necessarily be nice from time to time. Speaking of Martin Luther King, one of the things I remember from his letters in Selma, he was talking about how, I'm going to butcher the quote, so I'm not going to quote it, I'm just going to paraphrase. He talked about how one of the biggest problems he had wasn't the actual racists, it was the other people who agreed with him, but we're saying, no, we can't upset the apple cart. We need to make certain everything's nice. He goes, his point was, it's peace is not an absence of violence. It is the presence of justice, meaning God's justice, which is equality under the law. It is legitimate fairness. It's caring for one another as brothers. And it just seems like what we've had for a very long time is we were trained to believe in niceness, and it's brought us to where we are here, where now we can't even have a conversation about objective reality. The reality is whatever someone on CNN says it is. And if you're like, well, hey, I got a question about that, you're instantly canceled and chucked out the window.
Well, I think Dawn brought up a really great point, and I want to tap in on it. The concept of this identity, a common belief and value structure. I think what's happened is, in an attempt for everyone to embrace this individual mentality and individual identity, and I don't mean in terms of an individual spirit created by God. I mean more of this. I am a 6'2" Caucasian, Italo-Irish Catholic American who works. This concept, we've broken apart from having a national identity to having a racial or a previously heritage-based identity. For example, I'll have friends and you speak to them, and one of my friends said, well, I want to be careful because my wife is a minority and my daughter will be a minority. And I said, well, why is that the case? He said, well, because they're Mexican background. I was like, wait a minute. They're all Americans. They're all born here. We're all Americans. Why would they be a minority for being an American? Because his identity was that to go to race immediately. And when we discussed it even further, it became this. I noticed the conversation became, if I wanted to provide a national perspective, no, you have the rights and privileges as any citizen to have this, and this. It's always, well, I want to make sure that people are being sensitive to the racial identity. And I think what's happened is that this concept of racial identity, where Trump's campaign and Trump's administration was about national populism, right, was it didn't resonate there. And so what you're seeing, I think, and what I think you're going to see a lot more of, is the incoming administration, I think, is going to try to present itself now as the great healer. Okay, we're here to bring pride back to the office. We're here to bring strength back to the office. We're here to bring faith in government back to the office. But the channels with which they're going to do it, there's fear out there. The people are simply just going to be silenced. When we're using language like people need to be deprogrammed, people need to be re-educated, these are terms straight out of Mao Zedong's playbook. Okay. Now, a lot of people may not know the history to even be able to acknowledge some of these things, but it's there. And the way that you can create a single structure to overtake all of them is break apart the group into many. Break apart the one into 100 factions. You're not going to overtake the United States, but if you overtake New Jersey and then Pennsylvania and then New York and then Michigan and then Ohio, and the way you finish eating an elephant is one bite at a time. And I think that the pattern that we're seeing earlier, Alex, you made the comment about, well, we've got these topics and they're going in different directions. Sure, absolutely. But I think they're also interconnected. And I think the reason that some of us struggle to try to map onto where they are is because they're so disconnected. They're not connected by any form of national recognition or personal or an identity beyond that individual. What do we feel about it now? For example, we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance in school because it's what you did as an American in school. Now it's like, well, do we, don't we? What does this school district say about it? Have we had parents that have complained about it here? Okay, well, at this school, we don't. But when you go to junior high, you will. But then when you go to high school, you won't again. Okay. So there's these mixed signals because, to Dawn's point, there's no rational identity based off of a common set of morals and identity that we have. It's what's in the news now. And it's, I don't care how far left we think things are going to go. There are already those coming out against it. There are those who see Biden's immigration plan as being wildly in one direction. And there are already those coming out, Miss AOC and many of her teammates, saying that this is not far enough. I mean, when you dissolve the identity of a nation, not just through immigration reform, but I mean, you dissolve it in terms of its national ideals, and you make every part of it bad. When someone says the concept of American exceptionalism is white supremacy, it tells me they know neither about either topic. The concept of American exceptionalism is rooted in the identity that you can come without title to a position in this world based off of your talents and the conduct of your character and composition and makeup of who you are, not the sins of the father, to become who you are. That's what's exceptional about this country.
To that point, I think a lot of people, though, feel as though they are obligated to carry on the burden of the sins of their father. And if we're going to be in counselor corner for a hot second, it's because we've never learned how to lay those burdens down. We all individually, I mean, we all have father wounds and mother wounds because that's just what happens in life. But if we haven't gotten to know our fathers and our mothers enough to forgive them and to have compassion for them, we can't move forward. And we've been doing that for 200 years. So we're carrying this giant, massive mantle of not understanding history well enough and not having compassion enough for the people in the future. And so we're all walking around massively burdened. And therefore, we all have blinders on in different ways. And it results in us seeing different realities.
Okay, I want to focus on that for just a second, because that was, I think, brilliant. Because I think that's exactly where we are. And but I would take it from a slightly different angle. I think there are people who don't want us to get over it. Like, I don't think this is as much about actually dealing with our father issues and mother issues and these wounds of the past, in as much as it is exploiting them. So that we have issues. Shelby Steele, I forget which book it was in that he wrote, but again, I'm going to butcher it, so I'll just do it as a paraphrase. But he basically said that his observation was that blacks have learned that they obtain power by using the race card, because it gives them sort of that instant power. But white guilt, he said, that is it's the reason it works so effectively is that white guilt is about reobtaining moral authority. So for one side, because like you said, we've never properly dealt with these issues. We've never actually dealt with the father wounds and the mother wounds. What we end up having are white people who feel like they've lost moral authority in their own lives because of the sins of the fathers. And so they have a need to reobtain moral authority. And then the other side is, because they haven't dealt with the wounds either, they are exploiting this to get what they think they want. The problem is it's only creating more wounds. It's only making things worse, because to exploit the race card on white people means you have to believe that you have a grievance, and you have to find reasons to maintain that grievance. And it's the other way around. You have to, if you're white and you believe that you have to have moral authority regained from the sins of your father, then you kind of have to believe that you've done something, that you have somehow continued this sin, or you've profited more from that sin. So it's actually it's exacerbating the wounds instead of healing them at all.
Absolutely. Well, and and I think this is where the racial reconciliation stuff is spot on. We do have to expose. So in any, like, if I'm doing family counseling, we draw ourselves a family tree, and we go back and look at our histories. We go back and look at our emotional histories. How many people in your background have had depression, have had anxiety, have had alcoholism? How many people have been abusive? How many people have gotten divorced? We go look at those ugly things, not so that we can be like, man, my grandfather sucked. It's instead like, oh man, I can see how this has been following us around for generations, and I'm going to be the generation to stop it. But we're all like, there's this weird shame cloak going around, like we're all doing it. Because yes, you're absolutely right. It pays to be a victim sometimes. And it also sometimes pays to be the guilty party, because then you can be the martyr. And instead, like, I think the doors need to be thrown wide open, and we all just need to own our own individual contribution. Because if, as individuals, we contributed to racism, we should own that. We should heal from it. We should apologize to those we need to apologize for. But we can't apologize for history. And I think that that's the people who are still living in hurt from their history. They're looking for retribution for something that isn't theirs to be paid back for. And it creates such a conundrum, because maturity requires vulnerability, and growing requires vulnerability. And if we do that, then we have to recognize how, as a whole, we got ourselves here, not as a separated society. But that requires looking at both sides of the aisle and being willing to see ourselves in the other, and being willing to see ourselves in the other's perspective. And that's difficult.
So, Don, are you basically saying that 250 years of American history and the struggles we've overcome, and that what we need to do to get ourselves back on the right class is basically just to overcome our daddy issues?
Yeah.
Dear America.
Yeah.
Dear America. Like, we all need it.
Systems are everywhere, and systems start at home, and they go all the way to the top.
Well, and and this is why as we're rounding the bend here, Alex, I want to kick it to you because it is important that we address the elephant in the room, right? And that is with the incoming inauguration today. It's the bread and circuses, right? It's the pageantry of politics. It's the definition of playing politics. It's platitudes to the masses, right? I was speaking with Alex in pre-production earlier today, and we were making the concept that when you listen to a politician speak, they are more capable and more articulate at saying absolutely nothing than anyone I've ever heard of in my life. And you can just pick big buzzwords to make that point. Words like the future, together, strength, unity, whatever. It doesn't matter. Challenge. Just pick words and you can place them. And many times there are those who, whether it was Trump, who, trust me, I scratched my head more times than I care to think about why he would say and do a great many things. But there were other times that I would say, this is how someone speaks to you. In one of his last comments, he said, I wish you all well, but if they raise your taxes, I told you so. Is that not the most Trumpian comment you could ever hear for someone leaving office? Now, I want to bring this up because as we turn to the inauguration and we start our analysis here, the reason, and Alex came up with the title of tonight's show, I do want to share with our counselor friend on here with a level of vulnerability. Of course, the long goodbye refers to Alzheimer's, refers to dementia, refers to that sickness, that debilitating disease. That has touched my family. And it is terrible to see. So when people have said that about Biden, I cringe at that, honestly, because I don't think it should be dismissed. I don't think it's something that also you should bash somebody for. I do think that for matters of national security and the integrity of our presidential capabilities, I think we need to address it very sincerely. I do have concerns. There are a great many people who have told me very openly they don't expect Biden to make it beyond 2 years, and that he wasn't designed to. Biden was a vehicle to install the people into the unaccountable positions and then replace him with what they and who they want. Now, I'm not going to claim conspiracy stuff here. I'm simply going to say this. Alex, in your watching of the inauguration today, we had kind of a decompression session afterwards for the both of us to discuss and address. What was your experience? What was your response? We have an actual counselor on the line. Should you need this?
All right, hold on. Let me move over to the couch here.
Exactly. By the way, the clock started a while ago, so wait till you get the bill.
Yeah, exactly. So firstly, what the title is multi-layered. It's not just that. It's a lot of things actually that we're saying goodbye to. But
of course,
for me, it just felt like style over substance. Right? I mean, we know that we've got more troops in Washington, D.C. than we have in Afghanistan. We know that all of those people are protected by giant walls and razor wire, and and they're just going about normal things like it's normal. But all this was the epitome of political theater. None of it was real. It was all even if you. Again, we did not support the storming of the Capitol in any way, shape, manner, or form. We denounce all forms of political violence. It never solves anything. It only leads to more violence. But at the same time, this threat matrix is deliberately overstated. A lot of this is just political theater, and it felt like more theater. It felt like it just rang so hollow when your abuser says, "Let's get along and let's be peaceful," you can't believe it. You because it's not real. That's the feeling I got. These are the same. It's like everyone complains about Trump, sort of not calling out everyone in Charlottesville appropriately, and of course that's largely a lie. But let's work with that. At what point did Biden ever call out violence in his group? He never. The claim was he didn't name the racist by name. Well, neither did anyone else. In fact, you could argue that they have been encouraging violence for years. I have friends who have gone to the hospital because they were assaulted for wearing a MAGA hat. one of the first, as soon as Trump was inaugurated, right, we had the assassination attempt at the baseball field on a bunch of Republican politicians. Scalise nearly died. It was a Bernie supporter, and of course, the first thing everyone said was, "Well, you can't blame Bernie for this," even though he was calling. It's it's like on and on and on and on. There has been. It's not. I know Nick is trying to say, "Well, these are just these are one-off things." There's a problem though when one-off gets numbered in the hundreds. It's a pattern, and when I look at someone calling for peace, when he's never called out the violence on his side, when during the riots we had when I was on other shows, we had to make certain we said, look, we're not talking about the peaceful protesters, we're talking about the rioters, we're talking about the people who are burning things down. But now everyone who's ever even looked at Trump is guilty of what happened at the Capitol. And this is the language that they're using when they use words like we have to cleanse them off of Facebook and Twitter. When the comments that Nick made earlier or referenced earlier, I can't believe those calls for peace and to work together are accurate or even meant. I think he is competent enough to know what he's doing and where he's being and where he is. And I think that he is in as large control as he can be. But that being said, I can't take him seriously, not because of his mental acuity, but because of what he's done over the last 5 years. They've called for violence against us and against conservatives and those on the right. And they stand by when churches are burned and when my friends are stabbed and beaten and shot at. I can't believe it. It's all theater. And that's my biggest takeaway it's to make them feel good just before they decide to open camps. I mean, that's the only feeling I have because I know it's not going to change because now that the big scary orange man is gone, how's the news media going to make its money? It's got to go to the common person, the average person who was like, hey, I need someone who doesn't just hate me. I never thought Trump was a genius. I never thought he was playing 12-dimensional chess. I just thought he was the only politician in the last 30 years who didn't actively hate the American people. And that's why so many people voted for him. And to not be heard, and then to have violence visited against us actively called for and approved of. Let's remember, this is the administration that just took office are the same people who during the campaign bailed out rioters after burning down and beating people and murdering people. And many of these people had very long track records of crimes, and they still bailed them out. I can't see this as anything other than them making themselves feel good before they go in for the kill.
Well, I mean, if the concern you have is contradiction between message and intention, then absolutely, and action. I perfectly align with you on that because the elements that I'm concerned of are things. Look, violence at any level I don't tolerate, and I absolutely think is ridiculous in all forms and fashions completely. Now, I believe in self-defense entirely. I absolutely believe in self-defense, but I will say the messages. They've been talking all day about the president's 17 executive orders that he's passed. And the part that I find so fascinating is for a message of let's maintain a level of social distancing and COVID relief and things to ensure the safety and the welfare of people. What we're seeing now is, and I'm just going to use this anecdotally here, or for example, it is a concept that with regard to pledges that the Biden administration has made in Central and South America and Mexico, there are now caravans moving. Well, in addition, he's talked about terminating the wall, and you can read about that. Everyone, go check out the 17 executive orders that have been signed, and you can see what it's doing. So it's saying you need to be safe, you need to socially distance, but we're going to incentivize all of these things that are directly going to work in contradiction to things like health. How about the health of these people that are coming? How about their welfare? How about the concept of them potentially dealing with this issue on a mass level? The conundrum, the dichotomy between logic and action here is this whole brain and mouth thing that I think that we're struggling with. And again, fueled and supported by this argument of identitarianism and where it is, I don't see it contributing in any type of way that's sustainable, that's beneficial, or that relies upon accurate science or the welfare of people on both sides of the aisle and both sides of the wall. And that's a concern that I have. Terminating the Keystone Pipeline doesn't do good things for American workers, doesn't do good things, doesn't even help out Canada. Justin Trudeau, I mean, one of the most pushover artist leaders in the world. This guy, even he's concerned about this. I mean, right out of the gate, you've got to ask what is the intended welfare? Cui bono? Who benefits? And that's that breakdown again in logic. I think it comes because we have no central of normal identity between us on a national level, or an identity of a value system that we can share. And it means that every subject now is a hill that has to be worth dying on. Everything, everywhere, all the time. And maybe it's designed to burn people out so they disengage. I hope not, because I still want to believe in of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Even if it's not intentionally designed to burn people out, I think it is. And I think that opens the door to the rise of extremism, because then the only people who aren't burned out are the extremists. And in this case, the Democrats are in power, so their extremism reigns supreme. And the rest of us are just a bunch of morally bankrupt people. I mean, in their eyes.
Well, that's a positive note to end on. Hey, everybody. Well, no, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, I keep asking the question, how do we solve this problem? And I think the problem is it may not have a solution, at least not for this generation. I think this is going to take a lot of hard work.
It's going to take a lot of hard work. Yeah.
I think, but let's say it. I mean, I think there. First off, I have to believe that there is a solution. It might not be expeditious. It might not be something that we see all 100% on. But I think we have to come to the position that a solution exists. I also want to say that I think that one of the ways that we combat, engage, inform, and create the change is to become involved. Get involved at your school board, get involved at your PTA, get involved at local politics level, the mayor, the city council, get involved at your national and state elections. Become part of that process. Fight back. Take the machine that you see in front of you that you don't feel operates for the welfare and deconstruct it and move forward. My personal belief is the concept of identitarianism that we have raised this to is so hot, it's so untenable, it cannot sustain itself. It can't. It involves too many people sacrificing reality to sustain it. To tell somebody that you believe you're a woman because you want to believe that, I don't question that person views themselves or may have that belief about themselves. That's not what I'm here to question. I'm saying to inflict that upon somebody else's interpretation of reality is not sustainable. It's not sustainable. I, as a man, I don't know the struggles, the identities, the challenges of being a woman in contemporary society. I don't know them. And by just declaring something that my genes don't support, my biology doesn't exhibit, and that my mentality is not one that has gone through the experience of womanhood, I think are things that are more rational to consider and look at when we consider identity. But to use government as an instrument to push upon ideals and beliefs to groups that fundamentally don't have that belief, without the backing of science and investigation and decision and free will, I just don't think I don't think it's sustainable. And that's why I say that this environment is built on a house of cards. I just don't think that it's there. I think we're returning to what we want to feel as this highbrow, highly intellectual, theoretical, academic perspective of what works, and not the blue-collar, hardworking, middle-class, all-American family that's out there making that difference in their lives every day. And we've got to find a middle ground there. I highly recommend that everybody get out and read those 17 executive orders that are there. See what's being implemented. What I'm going to further focus on is to see what happens with regard to the agreement that has supposedly been worked out, we'll see, between Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer, with regard to the governance of the Senate, and how that goes about with regard to protecting things like the filibuster. Because at the end, the Biden administration won't be able to pass any of the really radicalized agenda topics without the Senate blowing up the filibuster. So let's see what happens on that. But there is conversation and works with regard to that, the two of them coming together on an agreement. So we'll see what happens. And then in 2 years, year and a half, really, when we start those elections again for the midterms, get focused now, get engaged. You know, the two of you are vastly more intelligent than I am, and there are many friends of ours out there that are listening tonight that I call upon to say, go do that. And I need to as well. The show is a great start. Let's take the next steps. Get engaged. If we want our country, then it's time that we fight for her.
And keeping in mind that to be able to get engaged, you have to have the energy to do it. And a lot of that's where I'm saying it starts at home, is to be able to stay engaged. We have to be, I hate the phrase self-care, but we have to be appropriately addressing our own issues so that we're not dealing with our personal anxiety on top of societal anxiety. When we are reaching towards personal maturity, we are able to be engaged in meaningful and change-worthy ways.
That is a great place to end on. I really appreciate that. And we appreciate you coming on. You've had some really, really great observations I think we need to really focus on and think more on. You know, I kind of like the idea of all 320 million of us sitting down for one giant, you know, group therapy session. It'd be really expensive, but I think maybe we could do. I've always thought
that
if we could
if I was at the helm, so we should totally do that.
exactly
Yeah.
my thought. I've always thought, like, if we could get like just like one or two, like a couple people who really actually care about fixing these things, you know, from the left and the right and the middle and all the different sides, and I could just sit everyone down at a table for like 3 hours over some Tex-Mex, we'd solve most of these problems, at least to the point where we would stop fighting over them. I think. But I love this idea. I think you've got a really valid point, and we need to explore that some more. So thank you for coming on, and to everyone who's listening and watching, whether live or on replay, we appreciate y'all. We really believe that y'all are going on this journey with us, and that this isn't about simply you know, a room or some area where we can all scream into the void, but rather that y'all are going to tomorrow or whenever you hear this, wake up and you're going to go do something to make the world a better place. You're going to take your place in the world. You have, as whether you're American or if you're even overseas, wherever you are, you have a moral obligation to make that place better. And I believe every person listening to this can do it. Can you change the world all by yourself? No. But if you tell people, hey, you know what? Listen to the show over here. They're talking about making a change and that we need to make this change. Go do it. Meet your mayor, meet your town council, your sheriff, your PC, you know, all these things. You can do it, but you have to take the authority on yourself and take that step out there. You can't, this can't just be a complaint session. It has to be a go do something session. So we would challenge every one of y'all listening to go do something in your community to make it a slightly better place. And like Don said, take care of yourself as well. This can't be raged or fueled by rage. It can't be fueled by anger. It has to be fueled by a loving care for those around you. It has to be born out of love. And remember, politics has a place, and it isn't the beginning and ending of your reality. Nick, say goodbye to the nice people and the not nice people too.
Hey, everybody, stay positive, love yourself and someone else. And Miss Dawn, thank you so much for your time this evening. We appreciate your care, and we look forward to having you back soon.
Thanks for having me.